Hi everybody, I'm Craig. I'm going to talk very quickly about web analytics, and I mean really quickly, so there's going to be loads and loads of things I miss. Just to get a really quick overview, how many people in this room are developers?
Front or back end?
Either. Actually, you know, write codes for a living, basically.
For a living.
Okay. Cool. So I'll be slightly more technical than I would be otherwise. Web analytics. It's a really big subject. The most important thing to know is you have to do it for the right reason. I talk to people all the time about, you know, the stats on their site, and they tell me all these completely irrelevant things, like how many people are visiting their site when, you know, they've got no idea how many of those people are actually converting, and they don't know what revenue they're getting from those people. So the mantra that goes around my head all the time when I think about web analytics is that, basically. Think about the things that matter. It's your health concept. It's not a thing at all. And I'm just going to go through the biggest things I find people do well on web analytics. I do almost all the analytics for GoCardless, for a company based just across the road. I've got a bit of experience talking to groups of people at General Assembly, and they always ask the same questions about all of their various different tools that they use to collect data. And it's what GoCardless used to do as well. When I joined, I think we used literally all of these tools at one point. And we probably used 5 or 6 of them all at once at one point. And it was horrendous. It was a complete waste of time. And we got absolutely zero insight from it. And there's a reason for that. Basically, all of these things measure similar stuff. Or they're subtly different, but they're pretty similar. I mean, Google Analytics and GoSquared are, you know, pretty much the same. Open Web Analytics is also very, very similar. Mixpanel and Kissmetrics are slightly more targeted at tracking funnels, but they're kind of the same. They're interactions that happen on your static pages. ClickTel lets you follow people around the site. It's kind of the same. It looks at what people are doing on your static site. Optimizing lets you run A/B tests. It's kind of different, but deeply, deeply flawed. Clickly, I don't even know what Clickly does. It was one of the first that we killed at GoCardless when I came in. Foxmetrics is the same, maybe something like that. Basically, all these things will try and collect data for you about what people are doing when they come to your website. And that's a really good idea, like fundamentally collecting data about what people do when they come to your website. But if you have 7 different sources, and if none of them actually link up, if you've got no real kind of primary key, you've got, you know, these guys don't even use the same bloody cookie. You know, you've got no idea which uses which, let alone go across them. So if you've got your funnel stuck in here, but where everybody actually went on your website stuck in there, you can't tell whether or not the guy that looked at your pricing page is more likely to go all the way through your sign-up funnel. So you can't segment it at all. And that's the first question someone's going to ask when you start digging in. And you have to say, ooh, I don't know. And the other problem is, if you've got all these guys working all at once, someone's going to say, I think that this change that I made to the website has had a big effect, and that's what Google Analytics says. And somebody else is going to say, I think it's had absolutely no effect, and that's what GoSquared says. Because they won't have identical data, and people pick and choose, so you get bullshit answers. Which is one of the biggest dangers when you're doing any kind of stats, is that people have this huge bias. People want to believe something. And if you've got 10 different sources, there's no definitive truth there. You lose all the power of analytics, which should be helping you make objective decisions. So the first thing I'm going to say about analytics, first thing you should take away, is pare all of this shit down. Have like one source. And for almost everybody, it should be your database. Because that's where all of your important shit goes. Like, the stuff that really matters to your site, generally speaking, if it isn't in your database, it didn't happen. If a user isn't in your database, they're not your user. They don't have a bloody login, right? So all of your really critical information is in there, and it's really hard, you know? When someone says how many users you've got, there is an actual number. You can just give it. And as much as you can, you want to get all of your other stuff linking up with this one. And that doesn't mean that you should push all your page views into a relational database, because obviously that would be insane. But actually, you could push them all into a non-relational database, push them all into Mongo, You can put them all somewhere definitive. You can put them all into Google Analytics, I don't really care. But you've got to put them somewhere where you can start linking them up. Just get rid of almost everything that you've got. Just focus on the numbers that really, really matter. And track the few things that really, really matter really, really hard. It's quite controversial. Like, loads of people think that the key to web analytics is using Google Analytics. I used Google Analytics for like 3 or 4 months, really, really intensely, and it was just horrendous. Like, and there's a good reason for that as well. And there's a good reason why I'm saying MySQL is so great, and it is almost all good analytics is really bespoke. It's really, really bespoke. It's the specific question that your company needs to answer. And you know what? It's not the same as the 100,000 other companies that are using Google Analytics. Google Analytics has built a tool which is great for collecting data. It's actually pretty damn good at collecting data, but when it comes to really querying that data, really getting deep into it, answering that very specifically, if I segment my users like this, what happens? It can't do it. It hasn't got the flexibility. If you put your shit in a database, you have a world of options in terms of the analysis. You can do the most bespoke analysis you can imagine. At GoCardless, we throw every single page impression into a Mongo database, and I can pull them out, and I can pull out an individual user, and I can track that individual user all the way through the site. And I can filter all the individual users that signed up, and then look at what their path was. And that's not just like you might imagine other tools that might give that to you. But then, I'll come to you and I'll say, what I'm really interested in is, people that visited that page. Or what I'm really interested in is people in the product that emailed us feedback. How are they different to everybody else in their interactions? And you start getting these really, really bespoke questions. And if your data is in some random tool, and if they don't speak, you just can't answer those questions. So, track things in the right way so you can analyse them in an incredibly bespoke way. Second reason that databases are insanely good is because you can get the data out and you can put it into a format that you can almost manipulate with your hands. Most of the big insights that we've had as a company from looking at data haven't been when we were looking for that insight. They've come from taking down all our data and kind of just playing around with it, right? Having it there and just being able to query it and go down different paths and see what's going on. It's come from actually being able to see the data and move it around and say, oh, what if I cut it like that? What if I do this? What if I do that? While I was doing that, I saw this weird anomaly. What's causing that weird anomaly? If you've got your data in a format where you can get it into Excel, and Excel's an amazing tool. If you can get it into Excel or get it into something similar where you can literally, move it around with your hands, it's so powerful. It also lets you outsource all this stuff to your biz dev guys. Like, almost anybody that knows anything about numbers can use Excel. It doesn't really require any technical skill. But you can do incredibly sophisticated queries with it, when you think about it. The kind of stuff that it would take you hours to write the query for first time round to do an SQL, you can do it in Excel. It'll take a while. It won't be efficient. To repeat it, you'll need to get someone to spend 10 minutes, sorting tables and doing horrendous things, right? But when you're doing that investigative period, when you're figuring out what matters, when you're figuring out what the right questions to ask, there is no better tool than something like Excel, where you can actually see all of your data and play around with it. Don't stay in Excel, but almost all good analytics is really bespoke, and almost all the good analytics that we've done started life in Excel. It started life with something weird is going on with our payment pages. Let's pull down all the payment page visits. Let's bung them all into Excel, and then let's look at them and try and figure it out. And then when you figured it out, you start tracking that stuff every day. You make a tool and you build it in, you instrument it. But almost all the good stuff starts out actually in Excel. This is really, really simple as well. Basically, all good analytics takes complicated problems and breaks them down. This is almost so basic I feel stupid saying it. If you've got something that you don't understand, break it down into a small bit. That's what funnels are. They're really, really useful. Like, this is actual GoCardless data, as of, I think we discussed it yesterday. But the point is, we had this big problem that we were like, oh, should we be doing something about this? Should we be mobilising the whole company? How much do we worry about it? We've got all these people coming into our site, and we've got so few people actually becoming super active, users of GoCardless. You say, okay, well, break it down. How many of those people sign up? How many of those people complete the sign up? How many of those people start using this a little bit? How many of those people become like super users? And it changes the problem from being this one of like, whoa, 0.1%, this must be awful, to one where you're like, you know what? About 10% of people visiting your website starting to sign up for your product, that's not very bad. You probably can't double that. People that start sign up actually entering their bank details and finishing sign up, a quarter of them, that's not very bad. You probably can't double that. Those that have actually signed up, actually starting to engage with your product, collecting money, almost a third of them, it's not very bad. You can't double it. Turns out you can't do very much. So move on. This isn't something you should care about anymore. It's not one of your, it's not one of the things you should be ashamed of. So you move on. If I'm talking about web analytics, I always include something about A/B. I mentioned optimized earlier. And A/B testing is probably the worst thing that has happened to web analytics for small companies in the last 10 years. Because if you're a small company, to do an A/B test that is in any way significant and has any predictive power, the amount of data you need is unbelievably large. Unbelievably large. And most of the things that you'll find people ask you to A/B test, if you're doing analytics, are the stupid small things. They're like the colour of the button. Now, I can tell you right now that the colour of that button on your website is going to affect conversion by maybe 1 or 2% tops. It's a small amount, right? Adding all of those little things up, that's going to have a big effect. I mean, the entire experience, the entire interaction that people have, that matters. But each of those individual changes, trying to A/B test them to decide which one's better, rather than trying to think about it, I mean, when you give it some thought, that's probably not a very clever thing to do. And if you give it some more thought and say, okay, so how many people actually have to come to my website? How many people do I need in my A sample and my B sample to tell whether or not the green button was better than the blue button? Then you start finding, okay, so maybe it's about 50,000. If the percentage difference you want is 1%. You've got to have 50,000 in both camps that actually did something, clicked the button. And that's a lot. And so then you start thinking, well, okay, I could run this A/B test for, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And before you know it, you've slowed down the feedback loop on your site. You've slowed down your pace of development so much that you've forgotten what you were asking by the time you get the answer. You no longer care about it. You should have moved on to another project anyway. A/B testing is really poisonous. It can really, really slow you down. Unless you're the Obama campaign, in which case you do get literally millions of hits to your fundraising website. Or your Amazon, in which case you've got so much traffic you really can afford to stop thinking. But unfortunately for the rest of us, there is no way that you can stop thinking. There is no way that you can let your users make the decision just by observing what they did. Not for the small stuff. And if you've got a change that you think is going to make some difference to one of your metrics by 30%, 40%, why are you bothering to A/B test it? Are you just doing that for the vanity of being able to say, I made that change and it increased it by 20% or 30%? If you knew it was going to be a good thing anyway, well then you're just looking at a vanity metric. Then you're doing analytics for all the wrong reasons. Then you're back to where we started in this. So be really, really careful of A/B testing. Sometimes, very occasionally it's a good idea. But generally speaking, it's a very bad idea. And thinking is a very good idea. I think I've only got one more slide, which is this one, which is what do you do with your analytics when you've actually got them? And normally I talk to our thousand slides on this. This is just one example. But I wanted to bring it in because it's another example of analysing the things you really care about, analysing things that you're most ashamed of and that you believe that you can make a difference to, and being really, really focused. And it's another reason why Google Analytics and all the other tools are so bad, and why your database is so good. Because you've got to be focused. You've got to focus on the one thing that you really want to move, and all the other things are just distraction. Like, you know, if you're telling your company, we need to be laser focused, we can't be working on 5 things at once, we need to be absolutely nailing this. And then you're going away and looking at a dashboard with 20 indicators. There's just this crazy inconsistency. You're not going to be able to measure, you know, the overall health of your company by looking at that many things. What you need is one. I mean, one is extreme. We have one. It's our revenue every day. Every day we look at that. And actually that's pretty good. Like, it means that you can't say, oh, it wasn't such a bad day because, you know, at least we had, you know, 10,000 visits rather than 5,000 because somebody put out a blog post. You know, that stuff's good as well. And you need a different metric for each area that you're tracking. And our guys on support, they look at the revenue number, but they have another metric, which is, you know, what percentage of emails have been replied to in a certain length of time. But they have one other metric. And there's laser focus. So in terms of what you do with your analytics when you've got them, the mantra should always be focus on things that are really, really important. I think that's all the slides I've got. Ah, no, I've got one more. Here you go. There's one other thing that we do with our analytics at GoCardless, and it's making all of the small little decisions. Because so often the numbers can tell you the right answer. And so often where there's debate and people who want to do completely different things, the numbers will unite them. This was a big debate at GoCardless for our support team about what hours they should work and when they should go for lunch. And there was this big debate about, okay, do people ring you more at lunchtime because those people are free? Normally they're working and, you know, now they've got an hour or two, so they'll probably pick up the phone. Or do they ring you less because many of our customers are businesses and businesses don't do business over lunch? And nobody had a bloody clue. Everyone had these anecdotes of, oh, every time the support guys go out of the room, the phone rings and I have to pick it up. And so we went for numbers and we started tracking for a month the time that every single phone call came in. It turns out that you should go for lunch at lunchtime at 1 o'clock. Because people ring you less. And it's really, really marked. You can't argue with that. And you could no longer have anybody in the company grumbling about people on support having lunch at lunchtime. And it's brilliant. It's a really uniting and powerful tool. Anyway, those are all the slides I've got. I massively pared this down because I wanted to keep it short. I'd also love to answer any questions that you guys have about web analytics. And I should be able to answer most things. So, has anybody got any questions?
Kind of putting internal data architecture and collection procedure in place in companies is quite costly. Even at the Guardian, we have a small data analytics team that costs quite a lot. What do you suggest that you do if you don't have the resources to put those things in place?
Generally speaking, the most important stuff you've already got somewhere. Like, the stuff that's most critical to your company is probably already being tracked. I mean, that's all the stuff that's in your database is normally, you know, it's normally already there, right? Opening that up is hard, and building tools on top of it is even harder and more costly. It's one of the reasons that I really advocate just getting dumps out of your database into a CSV and opening them up in Excel. Because it really lowers the cost while you're doing the discovery phase. And if you do that discovery and you come to somebody and say, hey look, I pulled out all our data and I looked at it and it took me hours because we don't have any bloody tools, and this is what I found, and if you make this change, I think it's going to have a big impact, then they'll start thinking about data really differently. That's what I'd advise. It's a bit harder because I know you work for The Guardian, and probably the data that matters to The Guardian is much harder to collect.
But the emails can come from a startup.
Mm.
Like, I know it's quite expensive for a startup.
Yeah. The time is hard, particularly development resource when you're a startup. Which is another reason why, as soon as you can just start dumping that stuff out and giving it to someone who's less proficient, technically, you know, you've saved yourself, you know, development time, which is probably your scarcest resource. Anyone else? Do people feel cheated that I've come here and said don't even use Google Analytics that much? Were people expecting me to walk you through, you know, how to look at customer flows in Google Analytics?
I have a question not really about analytics, but why Excel over like OpenOffice, for example?
Yeah, it was my, you know, legacy, I suppose. I, you know, used to work for a big consultancy, and there you basically have to use Microsoft products and become familiar with them. You know, all the keyboard shortcuts. There's no good reason not to use anything else. Like, most spreadsheets are as good as each other. Google Docs is not very good, but, you know, it's in the browser, so. Anyone else?
So why are these tools popular then? For instance, Google Analytics.
Because they offer an easy answer. They offer the promise of great insight from your customers, and they're easy to set up. Like this idea that, you know, you just put a, you know, little JavaScript, you know, widget on your site, and everything's fine, and everything's suddenly being tracked. And then once you've done that, you don't, you know, you move on to the next one because it didn't give you the exact answer that you wanted, and somewhere else promises that it's going to do that. Because people aren't really investing and they're not really thinking.
Can't you get the data out of the Google Analytics?
You can to some extent, but even then, it's very hard. I mean, it's very hard to link it up with what's going on your back end. There's a bunch of things that will push data to Google Analytics. I mean, you know, fundamentally, it's just a request that you're making to their little, what's it called, image. But it's a real fucking pain in the arse linking it up.
What's the new thing that Google Analytics has that like links in loads of other products? Do you not care about?
I don't know or care. I don't know. I mean, maybe that, you know, that Google are working on this and getting better, but they will continue to have this very basic problem that most of what they do is about displaying analytics at the kind of lowest common denominator, at the level that everybody wants it. And actually almost all analysis which is insightful is really, really bespoke. It's really, really granular and really specific to your company. So unless they conquer that problem, which would be very hard, and I can't really see them achieving without essentially just letting you export everything really easily, I won't be interested.
What if they used, I don't know how possible this is, but what if they used some sort of a kind of algorithm similar to what they have in search, where you can kind of ask it a question and it will give you an answer, you know, like in a kind of one box thing? Would that sway you?
Yeah, that'd be really cool, wouldn't it?
Like you could say, like...
But unbelievably hard, because it would need all the context of your organisation. I mean, that's what I'm saying. The problem is you need to be so bespoke because you've got all this context that other companies don't have.
Yeah, they have.
Like that's what you're trying to achieve. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Google Analytics is quite good for collecting information. The problem is it's so bad for actually analysing it. Like, you know, they do a good job of cooking everything that comes to your site and, you know, sending a request to a beacon. It's just a real nightmare to use the interface, and the exports that you can get out of there are pretty basic. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, you've been talking about getting the information out of your database of customers who've signed up. But if you're just looking at people who you're potentially to sign up, and you're not using something like Google Analytics to get the data, what do you pull out? Do you use things like the weblog?
So what we do is we literally push every single, every time we serve any asset,
Right.
we push that into Mongo, which is hugely overkill, right? And also causes us huge amounts of pain when we have to analyze it, because we literally have, tens of gigs of Mongo, which horrible times, right? But the principle is really sound, and what you would do if you were starting out is say, you know what, these events are ones that are really interesting, and I'm not storing them anywhere in a database at all, but I should. So when somebody starts your sign-up funnel, just push that in with an ID, and if they finish it, push that in, and as well as pushing in the ID they started with, push in the new user ID that you've given them, so you can link it up later. Like, if you think about this stuff in the context of your organisation, and the few things that are really, really critical to you, you'll set it up, really well. Anyone else? Cool. All right. Thank you very much.